Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been working our way through these 8 paths to a happier life. Today we're hitting the 7th one, and honestly, this might be the trickiest, the blessing of the peacemakers.
Absolutely. And the source material we're looking at today, it really pushes us beyond just, being nice. The mission here is to really grasp the difference between simple goodwill, basic human kindness, and what the texts call, righteous peacemaking. We really have to ask, what does it actually take to make peace that's based on fairness, on wisdom? What's the real gap between just sort of keeping things quiet and being someone who brings about lasting justice?
Yeah, and the sources, they force us to look at this on every level. We're talking huge international wars, but also, personal risks, fights on the subway, even just figuring out when to speak up, when to say the hard truth, and, when maybe silence is better. It's a real balancing act, isn't it? It seems like it needs strategy, not just pure emotion. Okay, so let's try and unpack this. Maybe start with the biggest example the readings give us. The war between Ukraine and Russia. It's been going on, 3 years now? And the human cost is just devastating. The number's probably well over 100,000 people.
And that massive conflict really highlights the core problem, doesn't it? When you talk about world leaders, presidents, major powers, there's always this hope for a quick negotiated peace. You might see figures, say, in the U.S. government hoping for a fast resolution. But the readings are pretty clear. Trying to end a war, whether militarily or politically, it's not like closing a business deal. You can't just shake hands and walk away. And this is where we hit that crucial difference, peace versus righteous peace. So imagine a peace deal where Ukraine has to give up huge chunks of its land to Russia. Land that Russia invaded physically for resources, for territory, for strategic gain. Well, that kind of deal, even if it stops the fighting for a bit, it's fundamentally unjust, right? Because it rewards the aggressor.
So if the peace is just about, goodwill or just wanting the violence to stop, it could actually end up being appeasement, which historically often just sets the stage for the next conflict.
Precisely. Peacemaking based only on goodwill. The sources say it's doomed to fail. True peacemaking, they argue, must involve fairness. It needs a standard of justice that goes beyond just what feels convenient right now. And that distinction, acting from that sense of objective justice, not just subjective feelings, that's what separates someone who's just peaceful from someone the sources call a child of God, someone acting from a higher moral viewpoint.
But isn't there a tension there? If pursuing that objective justice means, say, Russia has to completely withdraw and they refuse, doesn't the pursuit of righteousness then actually mean continuing the conflict? How does a peacemaker deal with that paradox?
Well, that paradox is the struggle, isn't it? It's sort of the human condition in these situations. The peacemaker's job, according to this view, isn't necessarily to win the war single-handedly. It's more about consistently pushing for working towards that just outcome, even if it takes a long, long time. The goal is peace with integrity, and we should never mistake a temporary quiet, a ceasefire, for real peace built on fairness.
Okay, that distinction between objective justice and just sort of goodwill, it's vital. Because you see how easily human judgment can go wrong when you bring it down to everyday situations. Let's look at that subway scenario the readings discuss, the priority seating fight.
Yeah, that one feels painfully familiar, doesn't it? You've got an elderly person quite aggressively demanding the priority seat, even like shaking a bag in a young man's face. And the young man reacts badly, violently, kicks the older person. The public reaction, usually instant.
Yeah, your gut reaction is immediate. The young guy has no respect. We just rush to that judgment. But the readings use this exact situation to show how dangerous that lack of wisdom is. When we judge blindly, we condemn the young man without knowing anything else.
Exactly. We see the older person, and we kind of automatically assign them the moral high ground. But what if, as the source suggests, the young person had an invisible illness or a disability? Or maybe they were pregnant. Blind love, or you could say passion applied without wisdom and without considering fairness, it leads straight to bad judgments, potentially harmful ones. We think we're stepping in to help, to make peace, but really we're just reacting to the surface, not the truth underneath.
And this leads into that really difficult area of personal intervention. The sources bring up that memory by the Dongshan River. Seeing those youths, maybe 5 or 6 of them, ganging up on one kid, possibly even threatening to push him in the river. I mean, that's where it gets really personal really fast.
Oh, absolutely. The internal conflict described is intense. What do? Do you jump in directly? But then you risk getting beaten up yourself, maybe badly. You become another victim. You leave your own family vulnerable. Or do you call the police? Knowing they might not get there in time, that struggle, that moral wrestling, the readings say it shows that peacemaking needs way more than just courage. It demands wisdom, strategic strategic thinking.
I wonder, though, if the sources emphasize this long-term righteousness, isn't just calling the police kind of passing the buck, pushing the immediate risk onto someone else? Does the source give any clues about when that personal courageous sacrifice is the right call?
Well, the key differentiator seems to be wisdom. That's what the source keeps coming back to, reckless self-sacrifice. If you get seriously hurt or killed intervening in that one incident, yes, you might have stopped that specific crime, but you've also just eliminated your ability to help anyone else ever again in the long run. So wisdom would guide you to find the most effective way to intervene, one that protects the victim, but also ideally minimizes needless risk to yourself. Often that means planning, maybe calling for backup, not just charging in blind. The moral struggle is real, but the strategic choice is what defines the peacemaker here.
Okay, so if direct intervention is that complicated, that risky, what's the alternative for promoting peace more broadly? The sources argue for tackling the root causes of violence, trying to reduce the sources of conflict itself, instead of just constantly, putting out fires.
Yeah, this is the long game. The much harder, slower work of changing culture. The readings talk about this example, 20 years of volunteer work doing life education in schools, focusing particularly on junior high kids in certain vulnerable areas. The main goal was influencing kids early, especially those maybe from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids who historically might drop out before even finishing junior high, because those kids, they're prime targets for gang recruitment. The gangs offer this instant appeal, right? Status, feeling like a little boss, maybe a motorbike, cigarettes, easy money. It looks like freedom.
Yeah, that image of freedom must be incredibly powerful compared to the structure and rules of school, especially if you're feeling left out.
It really is. But the life education message has to be stark, that freedom is a trap, a devastating one. The readings warn pretty bluntly that without education, without skills, these young people become easily exploited, used by organized crime for worse and worse things, basically ruining their future chances. So true peacemaking in this sense, it's a marathon. It's that patient, consistent work of guiding young people towards stability, towards education, high school, maybe college, steering them away from that path of crime and exploitation.
So the peacemaker here isn't just a crisis manager, but more like a community builder. It's about prevention, about making sure the support structures are there so kids don't get desperate enough to see gangs as their only option. Let's shift gears a bit. From physical violence to maybe verbal and emotional kind. The discussion moves into two really specific communication challenges for peace. Speaking truth with love and knowing when silence is better.
Right, the first one, speaking truth. The sources point out that, well, a lot of people are good at speaking truth, or what they see as truth, but they often lack wisdom or maybe genuine love in how they deliver it. They become like these moral police, focusing intensely on other people's mistakes, gambling, affairs, drinking, relentlessly criticizing. It's just so easy, isn't it, to see the faults in others? But admitting our own stuff openly, that's incredibly hard for most of us. And that kind of self-righteous critique, it often causes more conflict. It doesn't build peace.
The sources use that zipper analogy, which is actually quite insightful. Who tells a man his fly is down? His wife, someone from church, a neighbor.
And the answer really shows how peace works through wisdom here. The wife, she tells him right away, because there's intimacy, there's love, she's protecting him from embarrassment, not trying to shame him. But someone more distant, like the neighbor, if they just blurt it out, it could cause huge public humiliation. So wisdom suggests finding a different way. Maybe saying something indirect like, hey, might want to check your clothes, or just tidy up your appearance. It allows the correction without the public shaming. That thoughtful approach turns a potentially awkward truth into something that actually preserves dignity and peace.
Okay, then the second dilemma. This tendency to just stay silent to keep things smooth on the surface. It creates what the source calls a spineless nice person culture, where people avoid any confrontation, even if something is clearly wrong, just because they don't want to cause trouble.
Yeah, you can link this straight to that classic story, the emperor's new clothes. Everybody, the king, the nobles, they all pretend to see this amazing fabric that isn't there. Why? Because they're scared. Scared of looking stupid if they admit they see nothing. So they all go along with this shared lie just to keep the social peace, protect their own status.
Until the child speaks up, just blurts out the simple truth. The king isn't wearing anything.
Oh.
That shattered the illusion, definitely disrupted the immediate harmony.
Exactly, and the implication is powerful. Just staying silent to go along with something false or wrong. That's not real peace. The child, by speaking the plain truth without worrying about the political fallout, actually acted as the real peacemaker in that story. They exposed the foolishness, saved the king from even greater embarrassment later on. Sometimes true peace actually requires breaking a false, surface-level harmony with a necessary, wisely delivered truth.
All right, finally, let's look at the biggest structures that are supposed to create peace: government and law. The sources actually encourage praying for the state, even if it's all a bad or flawed one. Why is that? Why is some structure seen as better than none at all?
Well, you have to think about the alternative, right? Total anarchy. Even regimes we'd consider oppressive, think ancient Rome or maybe some difficult modern examples, they still provide a basic framework. They usually have police, an army, courts, power grids, water, trash collection, basic functions. If society just dissolves completely, chaos. Who do you call if you're robbed, if your house is broken into? There's no system, no judges, no accountability.
So the government, even a deeply flawed one, provides a kind of essential scaffolding. It prevents utter insecurity.
That seems to be the idea. And the sources also point out something interesting. Even with all the diversity in the world, humanity seems to share some basic, near-universal ethical lines, like no country, whatever its culture or history, actually permits cannibalism, for example. That kind of fundamental agreement suggests, according to the text, a sort of universal moral code. They call it God-given blueprint built into us. And government and law, ideally, are supposed to be the tools we use to enforce that shared blueprint, to create the conditions for peace.
But we all know governments are often corrupt or unjust. So how does the peacemaker engage with that? Is the source suggesting civil disobedience or just kind of quietly accepting the flaws?
The focus in these readings seems to be on the necessity of order, even imperfect order. The peacemaker's role, it seems, is to work for justice within the existing structure rather than just hoping it collapses. You're encouraged to be critical, absolutely, but the ultimate aim is the stability that allows justice to hopefully eventually take root and grow. The peacemaker tries to nudge these flawed human systems closer to that objective standard of righteousness. So what does this all boil down to for you listening? True peacemaking, it seems, is about getting beyond just our own feelings, our own biases. It requires courage, definitely, but courage guided by careful thought, by wisdom. And it means approaching every conflict, big international ones, small personal ones, with this blend of love, strategic wisdom, and a commitment to objective justice. Peace isn't passive, it's the active, ongoing work of trying to align the world with what's fair.
Wow, okay, that was definitely a deep dive. A complicated one, but really insightful. Clearly, this path to being called a true peacemaker is complex. It takes a lot more than just meaning well or having that initial burst of courage. It really seems to demand strategic thinking, knowing when to step in, when to speak that hard truth, and maybe when to focus your energy on those deeper root causes of conflict.
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. Peacemaking isn't just about keeping the peace, like putting a lid on things. It's the active, sometimes difficult work of trying to bring the world more in line with the standard of fairness, of justice. And yeah, that often means making really tough choices where your courage needs to be tempered, guided by wisdom to actually be effective. And maybe consider this final pretty challenging thought from the readings. If you rush into a conflict without that wisdom and you get hurt or killed needlessly, well, the source kind of implies God might ask, why are you here so soon? I had work for you to do down there. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How do you weigh the value of an immediate, maybe reckless sacrifice